Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I the Dragon, Cool and Beautiful Rabbit Hole, Lore and Frey, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. For those of you who aren't aware, I am now a Danganronpa completionist. I have gone through every single Danganronpa game 1, 2, and V3. And honestly, unlike most series, I did stick with Danganronpa to the very end. And the reason for that is that, despite all my problems with Danganronpa, in spite of the poor writing and the contrivances and the ridiculousness, I did find myself entertained from beginning to end. Danganronpa is not boring. And for that reason, I kind of feel obligated to say that I don't think it's a bad series, right? You're playing games to be entertained. And I was thoroughly entertained for a good chunk of Danganronpa, even after I went from thinking this was a really cool, interesting idea to kind of picking up on the flaws of the franchise. And they are very, very numerous. So numerous, in fact, that I hesitate to call myself a fan, because although I found Danganronpa to be extremely entertaining, that is very, very different from finding it to be good. That's how I feel about Danganronpa as it went on. The games started off strong, right from the get go. We get a really interesting setup with really interesting characters and a really fresh, unique idea, which is very unheard of in modern video games. And as the series goes on, it becomes more and more ridiculous to the point where you get to the end of Danganronpa V3, you don't really care anymore. Even with the occasional improvements and upgrades to formula that we get in the sequels, the games just never really recover from the problem. The fundamental problem of Danganronpa is that nothing really matters, honestly, and that's kind of the message of Danganronpa 2 and V3 is that nothing that happens in the plot matters. It doesn't mean anything. It's not amounting to much. Stop caring so much. And to me, I found that to be offensive in and of itself. I despise this kind of self-aware talking down to your audience for liking a product. That's kind of my view on it, is that I do find Danganronpa's tendency to shit on the audience for being interested in this property to be obnoxious. I do really detest it. And not only is it obnoxious, not only is it demeaning, it also gets in the way of what people actually like about the franchise. I don't think anyone would say that the final cases of Danganronpa 2 and 3 are particularly enjoyable or it give any real context to the situation or the characters. It's just a bunch of exposition that fundamentally doesn't go anywhere and doesn't mean anything. It's just it's senseless, it's nonsensical, and it's boring, honestly. I am shocked, thinking back, when I finished Danganronpa 2 and V3, how similar they are in the sense where, you know, characters just stop being killed off, and instead the entire game becomes this diatribe about how you're supposed to, oh, how you should feel bad about watching or enjoying this property, which is just not why what I wanted to see going forward. And V3, I think in particular, V3 seems to have been made in response to the ending to 2, in that they're trying to shit on you for not liking the ending to 2, because I imagine most people don't like the ending to 2 either. I know V3, I think, just doubles down on what 2 did, because it's the same exact thing of not only telling you that nothing really matters in Danganronpa because it's fictional, but you're a terrible person for liking it, for enjoying the game. And for me, that is just an absurd concept. Really. Honestly, I would say, as someone who's played all three games, the only legitimately good Danganronpa is the first one. And even though it does have deep flaws, even though I do have problems with it as a, you know, as a release, even though they're like, yeah, it kind of loses its thunder after like case three, and there are, you do get kind of bored of it. Yeah, it is too long. Yeah, there probably should have been multiple endings. Like, yeah, there are things to complain about with Danganronpa 1. I don't think it disrespected the audience the way the sequels did. Like the sequels just felt like the same thing over and over and over again with no real innovation or like improvements like to really like save this IP. And I really do think this was an IP that really could have done really well, honestly. Like a lot like when I compare it to like Ace Attorney, right? Like Ace Attorney is structurally similar. Like the first three games, the Ace Attorney trilogy, which are classic, iconic games in their own right. Ace Attorney progressively gets more and more complex as the games go on, even though that the core gameplay loop stays the same. Like Justice for All introduced the Megatama system to like incorporate some new gameplay elements into like the investigation sequences, and then like the cases themselves get more complex and require you to like do some more critical thinking and like use evidence in like new unorthodox ways, right? Like Justice for All is like the Ace Attorney games improved as they went along. They got better. They refined the concepts. They really made you care about the characters, right? And although the creators like moved on and new people took the reins for better or for worse, right? We got good Ace Attorney games after the original trilogy, and like but like it felt like after that point is where Ace Attorney kind of stagnated and kind of became this thing where it was over the same thing over and over and over again. Like Danganronpa feels like it was that way from the beginning. Like it really does feel like they fell into a formula and weren't sure how to get out of it. Honestly, like they had a really cool, interesting idea that sold the game to a lot of people, but they weren't able to really reiterate on it and improve on it and make it like interesting. And a big part of that is because the writers aren't good enough. Like they can't write mysteries. They can't they can't like they can't make the characters interesting usually, and they can't resolve the plot. They can't make a satisfying conclusion to the plot because you're supposed to believe that like there's something terrible about like the outside world of Danganronpa, even though that's like obviously not the case. Obviously, like I haven't seen any deep lore videos or anything like that about like the actual state of the outside world in Danganronpa. Uh, like I hear it's like actually pretty amusing if you go down that rabbit hole. But like my impression was that like yeah, there's nothing wrong with the outside world, regardless of like what Monokuma says. Like why would you ever listen to like what Junko Inoshima says? Like really, like it's the same thing over and over again, where like you have this exaggeratedly like terrible character insisting the outside world is awful, like worse than you could possibly imagine, but you don't really have any evidence for it. And this person is shown over and over and over again to be like completely wrong about everything anyway. Like there, it's just it's just not interesting. And honestly, one of the things about Danganronpa that I really despise, and I think the thing that killed it in general, for me anyway, and I'm sure like other people agree, it's the lore. Like the lore of Danganronpa is some of the most convoluted, confusing, like pointless things in existence. And they really do try and present it as if it like has some sort of like deep meaning, when fundamentally it doesn't. Like as we discussed previously, the endings to both 2 and V3 kind of go into this, where like it's all about, yeah, this is all pointless. It is all fictional. You shouldn't think about it so much, man. But no, like thinking about things like this is what makes it enjoyable. It's what makes it like compelling. It's what makes it relatable. You don't just mindlessly consume products. You think critically about things. You compare it to other things like it. And sometimes if something isn't good enough, you'll move on to something else. And Danganronpa is a weird case in which like it kind of really tiptoed the line between being like amazing, like one of the best of all time versus like complete trash. It's really bizarre how often I was telling my audience that like, yeah, I'm having so much fun. I'm really into this series. I'm really, really enjoying it. And then like you look back on it and you reflect and you're just like, yeah, this series really wasn't that good. it's a weird situation. You guys know what I typically like. Like I've played like basically every major video game franchise on the planet. You've seen me like drop stuff like Yakuza. You've seen me drop stuff like you know, some of these other Warriors titles. Like you've seen me like drop games before, right? Like it's not unusual for me to say that like, yeah, I'm just not supporting a series anymore because it's not what I would want it to be. It doesn't the quality isn't there. There are all these problems. Like you got like I think about games while I'm playing them. You know what I mean? Like Danganronpa functionally wants to present itself as if it's like fairly fairly smart when it comes to like its characters and like its situation and like and things like that, but it's very superficial. It's very fake. It comes off like the writers just don't have the ability to tell the story they're trying to tell. And and they try to mask that fact by shitting on the audience and pretending that like you don't get it or that you're taking it too seriously. That's kind of my impression is that like Danganronpa was made by a bunch of hacks who came together and managed to make something extraordinary in its niche, right? Like this does happen sometimes. It's possible for bad creators to come together and make something good, just like it's possible for good creators to come together and make something bad. But in this case, like the in this case, like because this was such a major hit, these guys had to keep like coming together and doing it over and over again. And as a result, the crack started to show. And like by V3, I think it's safe to say that like Danganronpa as an IP is dead. I don't really see it coming back in any meaningful capacity. We might see like you know by the time I think we do get a sequel, which I'm sure will happen, I'm sure like the vast majority of the audience won't care anymore. I think V3 kind of killed any credibility this series actually has, honestly. Unless like they give it a shit up reboot and just kind of like do the original, but like, give it multiple endings and have like, use the old characters, but like have murders play out differently. Like I don't really see like old fans getting excited for like new Danganronpa games, which is hilarious considering like V3's premise of just being like of just being like uh Danganronpa itself is like a multi-season series that's been going on for like 53 years or whatever. I uh I uh I don't enjoy I feel as if Danganronpa was really something that I could have enjoyed, because I enjoy things like it. I enjoy I games like Omen Sight, games like Ace Attorney. Like a lot of these kind of games are some of my favorite games on Switch. But Danganronpa fundamentally just could not compete with the games that Nintendo is putting out on their hardware.